"Don't you have it inside you now?" my husband said. I don't know why I thought faith would or could run out. "Then why did he give me a whole bag?" He shrugged his shoulder. "To share it, I bet." He smiled and kissed my cheek and said we were going for a walk after breakfast. Thank goodness we did. When we came home, we saw our home had been incinerated to a charred black pile on the ground. Someone powerful had destroyed it like an ant under a magnifying glass. I was surprised, but I wasn't worried. We had taken the dogs and ferrets on our walk. Our gray cat and her 3 black kittens were unharmed by the pond. The outside animals were alarmed and happy to see us. I wasn't sad except for the sound of our scared donkey crying inconsolably. I knelt down and imagined our home restored. When I opened my eyes, angelic master builders were completing the final touches on a mansion at lightning speed. It exceeded the craftsmanship of anything or any photographs I have ever seen. My husband would soon have it full of people who were homeless or recently out of prison or in some other scrape. The devil stay clear of him. He taught us that we must use our gifts and be full of mercy, charity, and confessions to keep warbobs and other barnacles and parasites off our spirits. The person who would become the Antichrist, who have been instructed not to name, is also the person who stole the sand. He then took credit for the recent miracles and set off a few of his own. First, he removed every child being sexually or physically abused from their homes and relocated them to a resort on the moon, where he oversaw their upbringing by robots. He changed their skin green, and then he changed his own skin green, and started a teaching that originally all human beings were green. He soon declared that he was Adam, our first father, and God, and that angels of light are the real enemy. And most all of the devils retold his stories. A shocking amount of people allowed their bodies to be turned green, and some changed their hands and foreheads as a pledge to the miracle worker and his authority in the world as supreme leader. By doing this, they avoided heavy persecution and were allowed to continue their lives unimpeded. Everyone else became a target of every kind of torture and malice, including children. Upon the demons who promised to obey him, he bestowed bodies of wood and stone, which they were allowed to animate. They were a ruthless, stinking, and detestable army that fed on flesh even though they didn't hunger. They quickly suffered severe corrosion, but they were able to enforce brutal policies upon mankind. He warred on the world in the name of peace, which he promised to deliver once the evil and bigotry of false religion were extinguished. He said that Jesus Christ was a being that was mistaken in thinking of itself as God. He made the case that the powerful Christ was actually the devil. It was utter nonsense, but so many people acted as though they believed it. He announced that within 5 years, anyone who did not agree that he is God would be exterminated and damned for eternity. In an attempt to persuade everyone that he truly was God, he boiled the ocean entirely dry. He stopped winter, and overnight the world became a lush rainforest, even over the salty ocean bed. He had erected tall monuments to himself with all the salt of the ocean, and said they would never be destroyed by rain. He called himself the salt of the earth, who would cleanse humanity. He began changing shape regularly, but most often would be seen as a giant, weird wolf that looked like a wolf and a naked man at the same time. The weirdest wolf, and the meanest. We call him the Scaggered Hound. During this time, many other miracles happened from other people with increasing frequency. Hundreds of years later, I am still hearing about and watching sweet stories from the last days. We watch history and personal lives like they are TV shows. People recommend different ones to each other. Some are so poignant, full of bravery and sacrifice that you could watch them on repeat forever. One of everyone's favorites is of a handsome jujitsu teacher that still teaches now during the millennium hundreds of years later, but martial arts have evolved. During life, he had a number of children that he raised to be champions despite their mother losing her mind and abandoning the family. This man was bombarded with enough demons to stop an army of men, but he humbly did great things for his fellow men and was a consistent beacon of love and respect with a heart that knew no limits. He remained this sort of man despite one betrayal after another. You can watch an entire lifetime in a second. Other people's lives flash before our eyes when we meet them for the first time or when they want to share something that happened with us. During the miracles of the last days, animals became able to speak, babies were able to speak, mountains and rivers and trees came alive and eventually fought to protect the saints. The Antichrist held ceremonies where everyone would drink the powdered ground from the moon because he said it was good for their blood. He caused over 90% of the men in the world to die in one day. Soon after that, death stopped altogether, and the skin of everyone who had not become green turned a pleasant, radiant, fair white color. After this, some people really began to alter their appearance and formed into tribes with like features. There were cat people with long, angry tails, and flying people with great big wings, and any kind of hybrid someone else might imagine. People took on animal and plant and fungal characteristics, and it was the most colorful and bloody living cartoon I would never have imagined. This all happened 2 years before the day the remaining infidels were supposed to be executed. There erupted a war between immortals who used miracles and brute force as strategy. Because miracles had become commonplace, even people who had never been given sand were able to summon the faith that had been dormant within them, enough to cause impossible things to occur. For example, there was a place where that scaggered hound, the weird wolf, destroyed all vegetation, including the white flower, and entire nations began to starve. Then sea turtles and walruses bigger than mountains crawled out of the boiling sea and died half-cooked by the starving people who needed them. Life became a bloody and graphic nightmare, with people enduring obliteration and reanimation, limited only by what they could dream up. It came to pass that we bound Satan, and he agreed to remain in a kingdom with borders he couldn't cross for 1,000 years, if we would agree to destroy the embodied army of devils who had dared to double-cross him. The Antichrist had annoyed the devil so much by claiming to be God and claiming to have unlocked magic for the world that the devil teamed up with the saints against him. Combined with their forces, he became the Midgard serpent, and he swallowed up every demon and soul that belonged to him and slithered away to his kingdom with them bulging down his belly. Those that remained were still at war with us and had developed weapons that could truly destroy us. Amid all this, there were some people who would not use miracles, even though they knew that they could. I don't understand them. Maybe they missed the days before things changed, or maybe they didn't trust what could happen. Those people walked to the safe havens that we and others like us had made. Only when we had become accustomed to the changes did the world notice what we would call fairies. They were the tiny but powerful spirits of our ancestors in adorable, tiny nature-themed houses and villages all over the world. They could, of course, change size and be big, or so small that they couldn't be seen. Many spirits chose to be tiny most often. Maybe it is polite. Soon after Satan was bound, Christ returned with the hosts of heaven, who are many resurrected beings, and began teaching and improving the world. A feast that still goes on began on that day. We were to participate in the resurrection of the remaining dead ancestors, who would also be given perfect immortal bodies. To prove that he was absolutely God, he lifted the veil of forgetfulness, and we remembered living in heaven as spirits before our life on earth. We remembered God and Heavenly Mother teaching us about physical bodies, and we remembered longing to be born into them after an eternity of waiting for the rush of mortality. We remembered that one of us, Satan, campaigned for a plan where every soul would be guaranteed to reach their full potential if they surrendered their free will. Those loyal to Satan gave their free agency to him and became his zombie subjects. He wasn't the biggest or baddest in his family, but he did pull their strings with total control. We remembered watching and helping our ancestors who became mortal before us. When my husband first came home, Adam's wolf dogs came with him as resurrected beings, and I mention them now for their great help in keeping the Skaggard hound, that beast, that Fenris wolf, at bay, when he came in all his cleverness to devour the ones still choosing God while he prowled the world spreading terror and greenskin. As a human, I thought my intelligence would be superior to the dogs, until it came to the worst of the war and I saw how their ability to react quickly and coordinate silently saved us from much suffering and loss. They saved our children a more gory ordeal. I'm writing now from 300 plus years into the millennium. This book was among those that have been written, and I was the one who wrote it, to send to you and my own self to inspire me to be brave and take on a vantage point from the perspective of eternity. There are scenes soon to be witnessed that are more horrific than you will ever write down. The Antichrist will commit unspeakable acts, but once we are all able to see his childhood, he was pitied by all and even admired because, by all means, he should have turned out worse. The night that Christ returned to earth, he came literally as a thief in the night, stealing the machines of war designed to destroy the children of God. They were quite large, but he folded them until they were small enough to put in his pocket, and that is what he did. Then he stole the hearts of the enemies as they remembered their own love for God, whom they had chosen to trust in pre-existence when this plan of mortality was presented. Every knee bowed, every tongue confessed, and we all do still submit our allegiance. Giant ants build stunning stone temples where we go to perform ceremonies to resurrect the remaining dead, and 5,000 or more come to life and walk out the doors on a daily basis of every temple. Those of us not engaged in temple work are missionaries to mortal and immortal beings across time and space. Until the end of the millennium, we are not allowed back into Eden, but new trees of life have begun to grow on Earth. New and endless dimensions are already being produced by the saplings. We are young gods, learning what young gods do. My mother is almost 500 years old, and she and my grandmother and my sister are my closest friends. We and women much older than us have new babies frequently. It isn't painful like it once was. In many ways, life is the same as before. There are lawyers and teachers and artists and restaurants and Olympic Games. Weddings are intensely sacred and lovely and elaborate and frequent. Everyone is forming their eternal families and learning to make worlds, and our natures are much improved. People share the things they love and give freely of their valuables. Rather than cell phones, we have Urim and Thummim, which are crystals from Eden that dispense knowledge and allow communication and remote viewing. They are the smartphones of the gods. We have assignments, we read and write often, but our letters are different. We teleport, we can time travel. We don't need to sleep, but we can travel to and through the dream world. It is an actual place. I don't want to give everything away, but it is good to be friends with the Sandman. Christ reigns over the world, but is frequently in other realms, and so he places people in charge over one another during his absence. My husband governs what was once known as Australia, but it looks totally different than before the end. The entire world is a big Urim and Thummim. The trees and flowers and animals are more heavenly versions of themselves with hair and eyes of flames. We are able to see the eyes that cover leaves, and beings of all kinds treat one another with respect. There are prophecies of what will happen when the 1,000-year ends and Satan's contract expires. Some think that if he has minded his promise, then God will reward. Reward him with a surprise at that time. 144,000 saints guard the perimeter of the kingdom. We honor their sacrifice, and my husband has taken some long shifts and would go again, but my son has convinced him to stay home with me and enjoy being a father and trust others to do that work. He is forever the soldier, but he is home now, and I am thankful for that. Some people whose reputations are heinous will not be resurrected until after everyone else has been. Their spirits can do helpful tasks for the living to try and improve their situation. Others are resigned to their fate, and they haunt the dream worlds, pining for their physical bodies. Judgment Day isn't until the end of this 1,000 years. I'm thankful we have time to grow, because I am still very disappointed in me sometimes, even with Satan gone. Some of the prophecies are unnerving, myself in this time and every time. I implore you to trust God and be brave. There are things we now know about God that I can't tell you, past self, but you would be excited. You would be happy about it if you knew. I want you to enjoy the wonder of humanity. That is one thing I miss. There is far less wondering when you can see all things. It is its own thrill, of course, but it is a weird transition from my old self, who I'm writing to now, to avoid losing touch with you altogether. I wonder what more you will do with your faith, given the extra time and information. There will be grand surprises I didn't warn you about. If you get this, and you can make the time, write me back.